Monday. I hope you're enjoying this format for our online lessons. It's a little different than what we've been doing, and I'm just hoping that it's more interesting for you and might even be a little bit more educational than what we had been doing. And more of you are answering my question and doing your assignment, so I'm pretty thrilled anyway. Today's lesson, I'm filming partly in the greenhouse and then partly outside because I've outgrown my greenhouse and I don't fit in here to do the work that I need to be doing, so I'm expanding to outside. But I am currently standing in our greenhouse. When most people think of a greenhouse, they think of a really large structure. And that's true for a lot of people, but a greenhouse doesn't necessarily have to be a big structure. The one I am currently standing in is about 12 foot by 24 foot. So not that big of a structure. And if you're paying attention as my camera woman is zooming around, like I said, I've outgrown this greenhouse. It was a great size when we started doing farmers markets and we started raising crops in here, but we don't fit anymore. And besides the vegetables that we're starting for our gardens, we now start vegetables for other people. And my mom and I also love to play with houseplants and various other things. So we don't fit anymore. We, on this middle table, have about 1,700 tomato plants. Tomatoes are one of our key crops in the summer. They are raised in our high tunnel, which I will show you in a later video about high tunnels, but these are raised in the high tunnel. We take all of our tomatoes to the farm market, and pretty much we can sell any tomato that I can get to Cleveland. But I don't raise 1,700 tomatoes. I wouldn't be able to sell that many tomatoes. But quite a few years ago, people started asking us in the spring if we had any extra plants. Can I buy an extra plant from you? Did you have one that you didn't plant? I'd be willing to buy it. So my mom and I just started, starting some extra seeds and then transplanting them into a bigger pod, and we started taking those to Cleveland, and things kind of went nuts, to say the least. Maybe I'll film a day at market when people are buying tomato plants. It's crazy. It really has flourished, and so obviously now we are raising thousands of tomato plants. These are heirloom tomato plants, meaning they're an older variety. To be an heirloom, they have to be older. The seed has to be have been around for more than 50 years to be considered an heirloom. And a lot of people are looking for those because you can't find heirloom varieties at Lowe's or Home Depot or a lot of garden centers. They're raising Beefmaster and Pink Girl and that sort of thing they're hybrids. They're new varieties, and we produce hybrids for a reason. They're usually more disease resistant, but they don't taste as good. People want heirloom tomatoes because of their really, really good flavor. So that's another reason that we have such a good market for them. People can't find any other heirloom tomato anywhere else. Today I'm going to show you how we transplant our tomatoes and talk a little bit about why we transplant. Why can't I just take them in the tray that they're in? And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the root system of a tomato because they kind of have an interesting root that not all plants have. To do this, I'm going to have to get my stuff and take you outside. So I'll pause for a minute and meet you outside the greenhouse. I'm having my camera woman walk up here to my work table just so you could get a little bit of an idea of the size of the greenhouse. You should have been able to see it from a distance. It's not very big. And we can grow a lot of stuff in here. So backyard gardening is becoming more popular, especially now that we're in a pandemic and people are concerned about food production. But it's very simple to have a little greenhouse in your backyard that you can start seeds in. You can even grow food in here early in the spring and later in the fall when it's getting cold. If you choose to heat your greenhouse, you can grow stuff all year long if you have the right kind of lighting. Since we live in Ohio, you can't just rely on sunlight in the winter. You would need to supplement with a special kind of lighting that plants can still grow under. But back to transplanting tomatoes. Transplanting isn't hard. I had you guys in class transplant some succulents earlier this year for Plant Animal Science. You're just taking a plant that has outgrown the pot that it was in and you're putting it in a bigger pot. My tomatoes were actually started in a tray that had about 200 seeds per tray. We then transplanted them into this tray, which has 50 tomato plants in it. What this does is it allows the plant's roots to have space to expand. And it's a good thing for you to start small in a small space and then work your way up. If you were to start a small seed in a really large pot, for one, you're going to overwater that seed trying to keep the pot moist enough. But if you start in a very small cell, you can easily monitor how much water you're giving that particular seed, and then just move up per size as needed. It also helps to regulate nutrients. If you're putting one seed in a really big area and then you're trying to fertilize, it's really hard to do. So generally, if you're growing tomato plants, you start your seeds in a small container and then you transplant them as they grow. The other thing that does is as the roots grow and they fill that space, I'll just pull one out. We'll use this guy here. Their roots, you'll see, start to get kind of cramped. And in a way, that's okay, because if you have roots that look like this and then you put them in a bigger container, these roots got just enough stress that as soon as they have space to grow, they're going to grow like mad. If you wait too long and they get root bound, you look at the roots and you see that they're starting to turn yellow, that plant is really stressed, and that's going to have a hard time growing in your garden once you put it out if you've let those roots get kind of yellow. So white roots are healthy, like what we're looking at here. The other thing about a tomato, I'm going to pull this guy off. Tomatoes grow, this is going to be your question for the day, so I won't say it. They grow a type of root on the sides that help support the plant. And I stole a corn plant from, I believe it was Campbell's. I took my kids to the nature center hiking yesterday, and there was lots of corn stubble left in the field, so I took the liberty of pulling one out, because corn plants will do the same thing. They will grow a special kind of root on the side of the stalk that helps support that plant. So these two crops do the same thing. These roots do absorb some nutrients and water, but that's not their primary function. Their primary function is just to hold that plant in the ground, because the vegetable, the tomato or the ear of corn, that grows at the top of the plant, and that makes the plant top heavy. So if these plants didn't have these extra roots on the side supporting them, they would most likely fall over, and then your crop is sitting on the ground, which just leads to rot or animals eating them, etc. So these extra roots are really vital for the health and the well-being of this plant. Tomato plants also do something else that's really cool. When we put this tomato plant into its bigger pot, I'm not just gonna, put this part that has soil on it in and just cover it to that level. I'm actually gonna bury this tomato plant almost up to this top set of leaves. And the reason for that is because if you zoom in, you can see little tiny root hairs on the side of this tomato plant. And when these touch the soil, they will actually become a root. If any of you have grown a tomato at your house before, and maybe you had it in a cage and it flopped over, you probably noticed at the end of the season when you went to rip it out that wherever that tomato plant was touching the ground, it had actually rooted itself. And that's why, because each of these little hairs will actually become a root. So we're going to take advantage of that when we transplant this tomato. I'm going to plant it up high, put my soil up high so that I have more roots for nutrient and water absorption. And I also have more roots to help support this plant, because by the end of the season, this tomato plant's going to be taller than I am. For transplanting our tomatoes for sale, we transplant them into 4-inch pots. And I'm simply going to put some potting soil that has some fertilizer in it in the bottom of my pot. I'm going to dig a little hole where my tomato plant is just going to rest. And then I simply fill the rest of my pot up with soil. You don't need to pack the soil down. I've watched people plant things before and they get done and they're packing the soil down. You don't want to do that. That smashes all of your little pockets of air. Your plant roots need to have air. It compacts the soil. So I don't need to do that. I might tap the bottom a little bit just to get my potting soil to settle a little bit, but that's all I'm going to do. And by the end of this week, when these tomato plants are ready to take to our farm market, I should be able to grab this tomato plant and pull it out of its container, and I'll have a block of soil with roots around it, just like what you saw before I transplanted them. Not all plants grow roots that quickly, but tomato plants do, and you really wouldn't want to plant this tomato plant out until it had that many roots established. So your question for today: tomato plants, corn plants will grow these extra roots, which I almost gave you the answer for earlier. But your question for the day is, tell me what this type of root that supports a plant is called.